Okay, I'm interviewing Mr. Jimmie Thomas, who is the second great-grandson of Odila Maxwell, who, of course, was the sister of Pete and Paulita Maxwell, whose home Billy the Kid was supposedly shot and killed by Pat Garrett in 1881. So with that said, Mr. Thomas is here to tell us his story. All right, go ahead, Mr. Thomas.
Yes, like Mr. Hall said, my name is Jimmie Thomas, second grandson of Odila. Of course, she had married Emmanuel Abrea, so her married name was Abrea. My father talked to me when I was young about the events that took place. My mother's side of the family, my mother's maiden name was Finley, and that name comes from Odila's and Manuel's daughter, Amelia, who at some point had married a Ulysses Finley, and then they together had my grandfather, Jeff Finley, who was from Albuquerque. I did remember Jeff, my grandpa Jeff, as a young guy, and although he did not pass away till, I believe, 1973, there in Albuquerque, for a number of years, our families were separated due to divorce from my mom and dad. So I don't remember my grandpa Jeff later on, in the years just before his passing. My older sister did spend some time with him out there in Carlsbad, where we were born. But my dad had always talked about, in the later 50s, after marrying my mother, how they would go to Fort Sumner. And there was actually a house that I think is still there that Lucian Maxwell's wife, Pete Maxwell's mother, had built in 1884, about a mile or so up the road there from the old Fort Sumner. But Dad would tell me that the Finleys and the Abreas and the Maxwells at the time in the 50s were actually charging like 25 cents a head, I believe is what he said, to view a room of that adobe house, claiming it to be where Billy the Kid was shot. But of course, by the 1950s, the original Maxwell House there, that originally was a officer's quarters when it was a fort, that had been remodeled into a home by Lucian Maxwell, Pete's father. That's where the actual shooting took place, not the other house built in 1884. I was, back in about 1992, was able to go see that home, what was called the Maxwell Abrea home, and was given permission by them, the property owner, a lady by the last name of Horney. I've actually still got pictures of that I took while I was there. It was in 1992. But then again, just generally growing up and hearing the stories, and there's, of course, still some family members that live up in the Albuquerque area. Most of them were up in their 80s and 90s. And it's been probably a year or two since I've talked to some of them, so some of them might even be gone by now. But I just always found it intriguing of the stories and the folklore. Realistically, I have to believe that because many, if not most of the townspeople there in Fort Sumner at the time, back in 1881, were all pretty much friends with Billy the Kid. And having said that, of course, when the opportunity arose, from what I've been told, to help somebody cover something up, they were willing to do that. I do know that, family lore says that the night that happened, in July of 1881, that Pat Garrett basically, of course he was in town looking for Billy the Kid, no doubt about that, but that after speaking with Pete in that home, that he was literally kind of laying up underneath I don't know if you call it a love seat or what, but just a elongated bench sitting in the hallway there. Because people had to realize that being officers' quarters originally, and at that time had just a very long hallway down the center of it with rooms off to each side, individual rooms for where the officers originally stayed. So when the person actually stepped up onto the porch, looking to be, there to cut some meat, and then come into the front doorway, Pat Garrett was underneath that bench with a double-barrel shotgun, and basically pretty much what you might call blow their head off. There probably wasn't a whole lot to see. And of course, what I understand is the burial and all that took place, the cleaning of the body, was done very rapidly. Not long after the actual shooting, I understand there was a attempt to get away, and they did get away, but there was a gunfight of some sort that took from a distance. And at that time, while Billy the Kid, the actual Billy the Kid, was making his escape, he was hit in the hip area, I believe is what I was told. So, once again, it was just told that he got away, but everybody was able to kind of go along with the story, so to speak. And also the name that I remember being told of the gentleman who was killed in place of Billy the Kid, his name was, I believe they said, Billy Valdez. I've heard that name several times through the years. And then back in, I guess it was probably 2017, 2018, my wife and I actually went out. I had never been to the northeast section of New Mexico. And at that time, I still had some relatives on my mom's side that run a ski resort type deal at Eagle's Nest, which is pretty much halfway between Red River and Angel Fire. And so we went out there after flying into Santa Fe and getting a rental car and driving all the way over, and was very intrigued while we were there for about a week total by going and seeing some of the places where my third great grandpa Lucian Maxwell, held and built different houses and stuff, such as Rialto, Cimarron, Cedar Grist Mill, Red River, Angel Fire. On our way back, went to spend some time in Taos. And what I really found intriguing most of all at the time was people would ask us what we were doing there from Virginia, because our rental car had Virginia license plate, but which was from Texas. And so they'd wonder what we were doing up there. And I'd always say, well, we just come to see where my third great grandpa's property was. And so most of the younger generation didn't know who we were talking about. But it seemed to me, looking back, all the older generation, there was places we went, we didn't get charged for staying. It was just remarkable the respect that was, for him as an individual. Once again, then, as getting up in my years and being intrigued with the story of Billy the Kid, my wife and I have been down to Hico. I've studied a lot of that. I've read really a lot of books through the years. And I personally do and firmly believe that Brushy Bill Roberts was Billy the Kid. And I guess unless you have some more questions, Brett, that's about all I have to say.
No, that's fascinating. I think you did an awesome job at telling the story there. And I think what's really unique about this story is how little has actually been told from the Maxwell's perspective. I mean, actually,
right.
We only have Paulita's words that were in Walter Noble Burns' book, The Saga of Billy the Kid, which a lot of historians now say was heavily manipulated. In fact, John Tuska in Billy the Kid, His Life and Legend said he believed most of the Burns interviews were almost entirely fabricated.
Right.
And then you have basically what little that was done by Miguel Antonio Otero in his book on Billy the Kid. And other than that, there really isn't anything. Pete Maxwell was never recorded, which has always fascinated me. Here you have a guy that was actually an eyewitness to what happened, and he never as far as I'm aware, and I've been studying this for well over 30 years, and I've never been able to find a single account he's given as far as doing any kind of interview or book or anything. And so that's why whenever you agreed to do this, I was so excited, because it's just such a rare thing to have the actual words come directly from a Maxwell family member as what they've heard. I mean, even though you weren't there, you're related to these people, and you're not that far, because I think Odila, she was living until I believe it was like the 1930s. And
she was.
And I believe her oldest child was still alive up until like right around 1990, if I'm remembering correctly. So, I mean, it's not that far removed. So any information that you had, I just think it's important to record for history, because I think a lot of times family oral histories are often overlooked. And
yes, it is.
Yeah, and I think it's really important to record these, because the science of history isn't a perfect science. And a lot of times we have to rely, in the absence of documents or video and things like that, that's really all we have. So I think it's just really important. That's why I'm so happy, and I'm so appreciative that you did this, because I think it is really important, and to have a record of this, because, with each year, the chances of capturing these kind of stories, because people get older and pass away and things, and it's to be lost to history, I think, is just a terrible thing. So that's why I'm very appreciative that you agreed to do this, and I think it's very important. So, it's...
Well, I don't... In regards to Pete Maxwell himself, different people, I guess, going to look at things different ways. Lucian Maxwell, of course, his dad was really what you might call, in today's terms, the go-getter. Being friends with Kit Carson and all that kind of stuff, they were just used to a hard way of life. Whereas when I look back and some of the things I do remember, because Lucian Maxwell did have a tremendous amount of wealth at one time, I think most of her, especially Pete and the older daughters, were kind of brought up in what you might call opulence. I think part of that's being raised that way kind of made Pete a lazy guy, you might want to say. So when his dad died let's see, Lucian died in 1875, when Odila was 5 years old. It left a pretty big place for Pete Maxwell to all of a sudden be overseer of. And although I'm sure by that time and age of his life, he had already started taking over some of the duties, I don't think he was quite prepared for what all was taking place. Kind of lackadaisical, you might say. And although Lucian Maxwell, I understand, was pretty fearless when it come to about anything, Pete, on the other hand, was probably fearful at the time in 1881 of the things that was going on around him, the things that he was in charge of, the things that he couldn't handle. It's well known that Pat Garrett and Billy the Kid were pretty good friends at one time or another. And although, I don't know if you want to say he had the opportunity or blew it, or I'll be honest with you, I don't think from what I've gathered through the years, it was what you might call a setup, or, I'm going to do this to help you get out of town type deal. Mm-hmm. I really believe he thought he was shooting Billy the Kid.
Oh, I do too. I agree, yes.
But, when he found out, even one of his deputies told him you've killed the wrong guy.
Oh, yeah. Poe. That's correct.
But then he had an opportunity not only then to eventually gain that, to me and you today, $500 wouldn't be a lot of money, but back then $500 was quite a lot of money. And so he was able to eventually, get that. But at the same time, it must have been a little bit of relief in Pat Garrett's mind that he didn't kill Billy the Kid. But that's also one of the reasons why when the townspeople gathered around for all of that, everybody kind of shut their mouth.
That's
for more
true.
than one reason, probably. First of all, because they did like Bilito. And he was a victim of circumstance in a lot of aspects. But he defended what was right. And I personally don't feel like, and through the things I've heard through the years, you know, what history says of him being 21 men killed by the age of 21, I don't believe that.
Oh, no.
I believe he got credit for killing a lot of people that he didn't kill just because he happened to be there. And it was pretty much the easiest way or the easiest person to throw it off on. But I've also said all my life, and I believe this still today, just recently turned 61, I believe if a man's ever going to tell the truth about his life, and you know, it's going to be in his last few years. And for him to get that opportunity and to just simply, you know, whether he was a religious man or not, who knows? Whether he was going to church down there in Hyco and Hamilton a lot, I don't know. But, you know, he really was trying to gain some sense of clarity, you might say, by at one time being promised a pardon and then it not being, you know, signed and went through with, to him just wanting that feeling of relief at the end of his life. And for him not to get that at the time that he was taken up there, you know, that again I think is a travesty of justice.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I'm just I'm grateful to have that in my life. The experience of it and the spoken words and stories, and because I just love history. A lot of people don't, I'm sure, but it's been my belief that through the years as we get older, people come more into history than they do when they're younger. You know what I mean?
Oh, yeah, definitely. I agree with that.
And if they don't, something's wrong with them.
Yeah, that's true.
Whereabouts are you located, Brett?
I'm actually in Alton, Illinois.
Oh, okay.
Mm-hmm.
All right.
Yeah. Yeah, and to touch on something you said earlier about how Garrett believes he killed Billy the Kid, and I do agree with that, because I think a lot of people don't realize is when you take into account the way he killed Tom Fired and then Charlie Beaudry, both he did
absolutely
from a position of ambush. That was his style.
Correct.
That was his methods. And I believe he was doing the same thing that night in Fort Sumner, and only in this case, whereas before, when he killed Beaudry and Fired, where those could be at least kind of accepted because those were wanted men, if he did in fact kill an innocent, basically, like worker, that then he couldn't explain that away. You know, that'd be an innocent killing.
No.
So,
and he was subject to the laws of the territory.
Exactly. And not to mention, he wasn't
held accountable.
Go ahead.
I said, and he could have been held accountable.
Oh, yeah, exactly.
And so that would, that would help for him to hurry and perpetrate that burial and all that stuff. Hush it up, so to speak. Quicker you can get the person in the ground, better off you are.
Exactly.
But once again, I know, and I remember talking to Dad years ago about it, and he passed in 2005. The state of New Mexico, even though I don't think any of us can be sure if that body is still in that grave because of the meandering of the Pecos River and all that, I know Dad said that there would never be any money spent from the state of New Mexico to do anything to prove that story not true, because it would take away so much revenue on a yearly basis.
Oh, yeah. I believe that's why, I don't know if you know this, but a few years ago, there was actually a group that was really pushing to exhume the body there in order to basically answer the question once and for all with DNA testing. The plan was to exhume that body, Catherine Antrim in Silver City, Brushy Bill Roberts, and then another claimant by the name of John Miller. And basically they were going to just do DNA testing, and it was actually led by two Lincoln County sheriff deputies, and they were fought every step of the way. Yeah, they were fought every step of the way. People started basically coming after them, personal attacks basically, until they were eventually forced to resign their positions. Yeah, there was there's a couple of books out. Probably the best one is this man by the name of Steve Cedarwall, who was one of the men that was leading that investigation. He wrote a book called The Dirty on Billy the Kid, which talks about that. And in a future video, I'm going to get more into that story, but yeah, it just goes to show how reluctant they are to basically get to the bottom of anything or the truth. Because yeah, I'm with you. I don't really think there's anybody under that headstone in Fort Sumner.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, even if you go to the story with how that was placed there, it was kind of an approximation type thing where they had like 3 guys kind of get together that supposedly knew Billy the Kid and stuff, and they were trying to figure out where it was, and they kind of went to the center spot of where they thought it was. It's a really strange story, but yeah, I doubt anybody.
From all the interviews, that was done with Brushy Bill Roberts and stuff that last year and a half or so of his life, he just absolutely knew too many details and showed too many signs of being who he said he was. Especially at that age and everything. There's no possible way, I don't think, that any one man could, even within the last 20 or 30 years of his life, could he have read all the things that had been written, but still know some details that history didn't even know.
Oh, yeah. Like,
you know what I mean?
Oh, yeah, definitely. Because during my series that I've been doing, I have a lot of advantages, that he didn't have. I mean, we have the internet and, things like that where it's much easier to do research.
Right.
And for me, it's been difficult, let alone him trying to do that, back in those days. And then you add the fact that most of these publications weren't released until well after his death. So I mean,
That's correct.
It would have really been impossible, unless he had access to a time machine or something, which would be ridiculous. So I mean, there's just it's not possible that there's any way that I believe he could have studied it to that extent. I mean, because there was, like, at the time when he passed away in 1950, a lot of the experts at the time and Roberts disagreed on some of the finer points, and only later to be that Roberts was proven correct. That's one of the things that has amazed me about his story. So
that's exactly right, which just bolsters the fact that he was telling the truth.
Yeah, exactly. Now, I don't know if you knew this or not, but did you know that William V. Morrison, the man that represented him, he was a descendant of the Maxwells as well. He was actually from...
I did not know that.
Yeah, he was from Kaskaskia, Illinois, and then later went to St. Louis before finally ended up in El Paso, Texas. But yeah...
oh, wow.
Yeah, he might actually be a relative of yours down the line, so... Yeah.
Well, absolutely. And I forgot. Now you said Illinois. Are you from that area?
That's a little bit a ways from me. I'm closer to St. Louis. I'm like right across the river from St. Louis in Missouri.
Well, now that town starts with a K, correct?
Kaskaskia, yeah. That's where the Maxwell family originated.
That's actually where Lucian Maxwell was from.
That is correct. Yes.
He was a fur trapper. And then, of course, Indian Scout, yada, yada. And I also found it intriguing a few years back when my wife and I did go up to Northeast New Mexico, because what I had remembered before we went, or before I even set the trip up, I had remembered in 92 at my mother's house at Carlsbad one day, her being on the phone with a lady in Albuquerque who she was calling Aunt Stella. And I asked her, who are you talking to? And she said, well, this is Aunt Stella. And she said, here, I won't let you talk to her. So I talked to her for a little while. Even though Mother was calling her Aunt Stella, it was really her great aunt. So Stella was an Abreu, and then her maiden name was Miller. So that lady then, the day I was talking to her in 92, I believe they said she was, I don't know, either 95 or 98. She was way up there, close to 100. And I remember her telling me, after all them years, that lady telling me on the phone, she said, if you ever get up here in this area, said, stop in, we would love to have you. And at the time, I could have swore she told me she had 2 nephews running that ski resort. But like I said, then fast forward to, I believe it was 2017 without looking back to the records, looking on the internet and then running across a ski resort for sale in northeastern New Mexico. And so I clicked on it, and the people who were running it and owned it were the last name Finley, which was my mother's maiden name. So I called them. and told them, who I was and all that. And they said, oh, yeah. I said, your grandpa, Jeff Finley, was our uncle, our dad's brother. So even though, and it was actually a male and a female running it, brother and sister. And they were, I want to say, 10, 12 or so years older than I am. But they invited us up. So it was really, really intriguing to go up in there. It's a very beautiful country. I'd never been up in there before. And, we've got pictures, took pictures, yada, yada. And then after being there almost a week, I think it was, we were given some phone numbers to contact people in Albuquerque, who after we got back home, I did. One of them's name was Lucian, and he was in his 90s when I was talking to him. I haven't talked to anybody there now in 3 or 4 years, although I guess I should, but I remember talking to them and asking them if they knew my mother and all this. They were like, oh yeah, we knew Rainey. They called her Rainey, but her name was Irene. Her actual name was Amelia Irene. She was named after Odilia's daughter. But I remember Lucian specifically telling me that at one time they had some furniture that come from that old Maxwell house and come from that area, where that killing had taken place. And even though he told me that he also grew up hearing that it was not Billy the Kid, they still sold them contents years before I was talking to him for a lot of money. I don't even think he told me how much. He just said a lot of money to somebody in California. And even though him being older than me, part of me wanted to say, well, now, why did you sell something for a lot of money knowing it's not genuine? But I couldn't do that out of respect for him as an elder. And but yeah, I do. I find it all intriguing. And like I say, I've actually, Brett, got some pictures from that Maxwell House. You're probably familiar with that, not too far down the road.
Yeah.
Where Fort Sumter was.
Yeah. My friend, and he, I don't know if you're aware of who Dr. Jannay Valdez is. He was a...
Yes, I am. I never got a chance to talk to him or anything. He's passed now.
Yeah. That's unfortunately he did. But yeah, a few years ago, I actually he sent me some pictures of that structure. And I was looking at it, I was like, wow, it basically looks like the Maxwell. In fact, that's what he would call it, was the Maxwell House. And I was like, wow, this looks pretty much the way it was described, and stuff is really cool.
Well, I tell you what's weird about that is my dad used to tell me that house, the one we're talking about now, at one time had a second story on it. And I can't envision that myself. Maybe it did, I don't know, but I walked all around it. When I got into town, it was late in the afternoon in Fort Sumter, and so I checked into a Super 8 there and walked across the street to a Mexican food place. My mother had told me in Carlsbad before I left that when I got up there, all I needed to do was look in the phone book. Of course, we didn't have cell phones. She said, look at the phone book for a last name of Horny. It's a small town, and you shouldn't have any trouble. So we get over there, and it's pretty close to dark. So everything was going to be done the next morning, but I was sitting down at a Mexican restaurant eating, and I asked the waitress if she knew of anybody in town by the last name of that. She said no. But there were two elderly ladies sitting behind me who overheard me, and they said they did. And so they told me just, when I got back over to the hotel, just get the yellow page, not the yellow pages, white pages out, resident pages, and look it up. Well, when I did, there was actually 2 or 3 families by the name of Horny. But lo and behold, the first one I dialed, you could tell it was an older lady, answered the phone. And I remember Mom telling me, she said, all you got to do is tell her your grandpa's name was Jeff Finley, and she'll know who you are. And so when I said that to her, she said, oh, yeah. I said, well, ma'am, I come out of Carlsbad. I just wanted to see this side of my family, some of the history. And if that house is still around, would you mind if I see it and look at it? She said, no. Honey, I wouldn't mind. She said, you'll have to climb over a gate to get back there. But she said, whatever you do, don't sue me. I said, sue you for what? she said that house is in disrepair, and if you start walking in it or whatever, you know, you might take a chance on getting hurt. And I said, well, ma'am, I wouldn't even think about suing you. I'm just grateful for the ability to go see it. So I was able to walk around it, walk in it. Of course, my wife and I wasn't together at the time, but I've described to her, you know, it still had the old well there in the back, which I understood the reason why they put the well up so close to the back door of the house is in case of Indian raid or anything like that, where they could get to the water, you know. But yeah, it was really, really cool. And I remember Dad had told me that once again, because the Maxwells, the Abreu's, and the Finleys back in the 50s was taunting that as the place where Billy the Kid was killed and actually charging people to come because he said he was there and seen it. He said when you get there, the door on the far right side of that front porch, he said, if you'll look down there at the wood underneath that doorway, he said that wood's beat down further than any of the rest of that wood around there, and it's because so many people have come and gone out of that room through the years. And sure enough, I think I've got a picture of that. It was one of the pictures I took. But absolutely, that was not the house. They were just, I guess, making some money off of it. You know what I mean?
Yeah, that's basically the same story I heard. So yeah, that's really cool. Yeah. Yeah.
So, but yeah, I look forward to all your documentaries. I've kind of been watching some of them here in the last year or so, and I applaud you for your good work.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, I'm just...
I hope that someday we can find out did Billy the Kid ever have any kids. That's something I'm not sure of.
Yeah, that's something that I'm going to get into later on. Actually, there was a man who was actually writing Morrison sometime after Roberts passed away, claiming to be his son from out in California.
Oh.
Yeah, so...
wow.
I'm actually kind of working on that a little bit. And there's some rumors too of a couple other ones. Of course, it's going to be hard to prove, you know, absent of DNA.
Right.
But it's intriguing. That's for sure. There's definitely a lot of stories out there. So.
Well, something else that's always bewildered me though is why history, or it seems like a lot of the other authors just absolutely have to say, oh, he was born in New York City, and why he wasn't a bit more born in New York City than I was. Why they do that, I don't know.
Well, that's basically because of the Upson, you know, the Garrett Upson book. Basically, Ash Upson was just filling in the blanks of things he didn't know about Billy the Kid, with his own narrative. And then,
right.
Yeah. So, and then Brushy Bill even said in some of his interviews that when I get more into the genealogy stuff, where he actually said he would tell people different places. Like that's why in interviews with people that knew him, he told some that he was from Missouri, some that he was from Illinois, some Indiana, New York. I mean, all over the place. Like he was giving everybody a different account. It's like he was constantly basically trying to avoid, you know, giving up any answers, which was pretty consistent with Roberts later on in life too. He was the same way. So.
Yeah, and I'm not sure how many years he was married to the wife, you know, that he was with when he passed away. But, I mean, people's got to stop thinking about it. When your own wife don't know who you really are, you couldn't expect anybody else out there to, could you?
No, that's true. That is true. Yeah, I believe
that's the whole purpose behind it.
Yeah, I think they were only together for 4 or 5 years, if I remember correctly offhand. So, yeah, it wasn't very long.
Yeah. Yeah.
So yeah, it's definitely a fascinating story, though. But
it is, and I'm sorry. Have you been down there to Hiko? My wife's wondering.
Oh yes, several times.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was pretty good friends with Judge Hefner. I don't know if you're familiar with him and his work. Bob Hefner, he was a Hiko native, and yeah, he's basically, in my opinion, the man responsible for keeping Robert's story alive. That if it wasn't for him and Bill Tunstall, basically we probably wouldn't even be talking about him today, because it was basically because of them is how the guys that did Young Guns 2, because of the work they were doing at the time, heard of him, and then I guess that's what led them to the story. So, yeah, you know, Judge Hefner was the guy that started the museum down there in Hiko too. So
yeah, and I also really enjoyed speaking with Miss Land.
Oh, okay.
Do you know the lady that run the museum? I think her last name was Land.
Yeah, Sue Land.
Yes. Yeah. I really enjoy her. She sure got a passion for it.
Okay. Yeah, I haven't been down to the museum since she took it over. But yeah, I've heard good things about her. I've seen a couple interviews and things she's done. So yeah, she seems like a really, really sweet lady. So,
yeah, it's, I do know I tried to pin her down about where his residence was, and to me, she was very elusive.
Yeah.
About it.
Uh-huh.
And I could understand that. But at the same time, I'm not the type of person, especially on up in the years, that I'm going to start vandalizing or going through or, anything like that. But I have since found, whether or not the house is still there or not, I at least got an address.
Yeah.
I don't even remember now where I got that from, but I've got that address.
Yeah, back in the, it was early 2000s is the last time I was there. Probably think it was like 05, 06. And the house was in really bad shape. We actually went down there with Judge Hefner took us with the owner of the property, and the house was really bad shape. And I think there was somebody that went and did a video walking the grounds a couple years ago on YouTube.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and it was in a terrible state of disrepair, which is a shame because I know years ago, Jannay Valdez tried to purchase the property because he wanted to renovate it and actually have that be the museum. It's kind of hard to find. It's kind of like in an alleyway. And yeah, like if you weren't familiar with the area or somebody taking you to it, it's really hard to find. But it's...
Yes, I looked at it on Google Earth.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's at 309 Lena Street.
Yep, Lena Street, that's correct. Yep. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's pretty cool.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a shame because, like I said, the last time I saw it, it was bad shape. It looked like it was about to fall down, unfortunately.
And what year would that have been?
Oh, heck. Well, that was, when I was there, when I actually went to the house, was probably 05, I guess. But like
okay.
Yeah, it's been several years since I was at the property.
Yeah, because it's probably only been 2 or 3 years since we were down there, and I remember Miss Land saying that the house had been torn down. But we have a neighbor that lives right across the street. She's in her 80s now, and she was raised there in Hico, went to high school and all that. And I remember talking to her and asking her about it. She said, "Oh yeah, they, when they were in high school and stuff, said they used to walk by that house all the time, walk into their houses from school, and how people talked about it, and so that's pretty cool. I'm always intrigued talking to older people about history, or especially when it involves something like that. It's just really, really cool. But yeah, something like that it should have been preserved. I mean, I believe, but
yeah.
You know how that goes. Once again, I don't know. There should be more respect shown for a person like Billy the Kid, but I can also see why, the flip side of it, why some of them don't. But I did find that when I found that years ago, that video I sent you from Hico, and there was a video in the 30s.
Yeah, that was really cool.
I just know darn well, and I didn't realize it at the time, the first few times I've seen that video, but that's got to be Brushy Bill Roberts. It makes sense. It
certainly does look like him from the time period, because I got a couple photographs of him taken from that era, and it does look like him. And the way it was kind of cool how he kind of looks away from the camera real fast, so.
Absolutely, it explains why he would want it. He's the only one in that whole, whatever it is, a couple of minute video. He's the only person in there that deliberately, once he realizes that camera's pointing at him, he tries to get away from it.
Yeah.
And that also makes sense. You know what I mean?
Yeah. When you send me that video, I think I've watched it 10 or 15 times now. It's so cool. And
yes, it is.
I mean, that was like during the Great Depression was basically going on, and everybody was so well dressed, and I just thought it was so cool. And everybody was so well mannered and everything, and it's just everybody's just walking along.
And when you think about how many cars was in that video that was parked in that street, and then when we were down there, of course, the population of Hico now is not near what it was back then, but it is. I'm like you. It's just intriguing to know that they were still in the middle of the Depression, and everybody was just really enjoying a good time, and then that music that you're playing in the background, it's really cool.
Yeah, it was. It was really neat. I'm so glad that you sent that to me. That was really cool.
Yes, sir. Well, listen, like I said, I've got them pictures. I'll get them out here pretty soon, and I'll send you pictures of that house that was built in 1884. But I mean, you said Dr. Valdez maybe give you some pictures or showed you some, whatever. But at least you can have them for your records if you need them.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, anything like that I'd be interested in.
Yes, sir.
Yeah. All right.
It was a pleasure talking to you, Brett.
Yeah, same here, Mr. Thomas. Like I said, I really appreciate it, and yeah, I'm just extremely grateful that you agreed to do this, because I think it is really important, and I guess I was really excited when you agreed to tell me your story. So.
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
And if you ever have any questions or whatever, you can, however you want to do it, email, text me, or give me a shout, whatever you want to do.
Okay, sure thing. Sure thing.
Thank you so much, sir. You have a good evening.
All right, you too. Bye.